What is going on, guys? Carter here. Got another video for you. This is part 3 of the Benchmade Infidel series is what I'm calling it. I'm calling it right now. I'm dubbing it right now. It is a trilogy starting with the unboxing and probably concluding with this comparison. Or maybe I'll switch it around and this comparison will be second. And the full review, if you want to call it that, of the Infidel will be last. We'll just have to wait and see. But we're just going to have some fun today, compare these two knives. I don't know if anybody has actually compared these particular two together. Lots of comparisons between the Infidel and Microtechs, but usually it's like the Troodon or the Combat Troodon or something else, and not the Dirac Delta, which these two knives are actually quite similar, as you can see. A lot of similar characteristics of these knives. And so I want to go through all of the different features, tell you which one is better, which one is worse. And so hopefully you can, did you see how I did that? I said better and worse? Like I gave it away right there. I don't think there's any doubt that I'm biased. And we'll just cut to the chase. I would recommend the Dirac Delta over the Infidel. In terms of getting the best knife for the money, flat out, definitely go with this one. But there's other reasons to get the Infidel. And really, at the end of the day, what I would suggest is you do like I did and get them both. So let's compare them. Let's do some stats. So what's interesting is the Dirac has a longer handle, but a shorter blade. And yet the total length is almost identical. Almost identical, like literally. I almost want to get an exact measurement because total length is almost the same, but the Benchmade has a longer blade. So I will give that one to the Benchmade in terms of economy of size or economy of scale or whatever you want to call it. Basically, you're getting more blade in the same package on the Benchmade. So I'll give that one to the Benchmade. And I think there's only one other thing that the Benchmade actually wins at, but you'll have to wait to hear that one. Before we move on. So let's get a weight. I'm actually curious on this. So the Benchmade, we are looking at, oh, come on. How do I zero this stupid thing out again? Come on, zero. Okay, there we go. Now it's zeroed. So we are looking at 5 ounces on the nose. That's amazing. And then on the Dirac Delta, 4.4. So half an ounce less. I could have told you that just off the top of my head. The Delta, I'm going to call it the Delta. I don't like saying Dirac. I don't like that name. So I will give the Infidel a plus on the name. That is an iconic name. It's a little cheesy, but it's definitely known. And it sounds cool. Sounds cooler than the Dirac Delta. So I'm going to call this the Delta from now on. So there's part 2. Name goes to Benchmade. In my opinion, your thoughts may vary. Now let's talk about materials. So we'll start with the butt end here. Actually, you know what? More things are going to be going to the Infidel than I originally anticipated. Let's close these blades while we're playing with it here. So let's take a look at the butt end of these guys. Ooh, yeah, look at that. Look at that back end. So this one goes to the Benchmade because it doesn't have the glass breaker. I think most people don't like the glass breaker. It's kind of iconic on Microtechs now. It doesn't really bother me. Like I don't really think of it as a glass breaker. I just think of it as a little pommel piece. It adds a little bit of flair, a little bit of style. It breaks up the profile a little bit. When you're dealing with OTFs and you're looking at the chassis, it's hard for it not to just be a rectangle. So adding something like that does kind of add a little something to it, but most people don't like the glass breaker. And so I think we're going to give that one to the Infidel for not having a glass breaker. Now the chassis material is both 6160. The finish, as you can see, is quite a bit different. So this is a bead blasted anodized finish. So it's a lot smoother. This is sandblasted anodized, so it's a lot rougher. This is subjective. I'm not going to give this to either one. They're both great finishes. They're both durable. Comes down to what you prefer. This one's going to be grippier, but it's also going to look more utilitarian. This one's a little dressier, looks a little nicer, looks better when taking pictures, things like that. So that goes to nobody. I'm going to call it same, same. Hardware, that one goes to the Infidel because it's, well, okay, never mind. It doesn't. Never mind. This one's a draw too. That's subjective as well. So Infidel's plus is you have the tool to take this apart if you need to take it apart. The plus to the Microtech is it just looks way cooler. And of course, you can get a tool to take this apart as well. You just aren't going to inherently have it. The Infidel has screws on both sides because it's a sandwich construction, whereas the Ultratech, no, not the Ultratech, the Microtech, the Dirac, the Delta, I said I was going to call it the Delta. I already messed up. Only has them on the show side, and luckily they're very, very pretty screws. And this one is bronze, so it looks even cooler. So for me, screws, hardware goes to the Microtech. Some people may prefer this. Now going into construction, that goes to the Microtech because it's simpler, less pieces, less fussing. If you take this apart, it's much easier to get back together, much easier to keep it in line. Because this has the sandwich, 2 pieces with a piece of steel in the middle, which is also why it's heavier. It is a little more complicated. You've got screws on both sides, a little harder to take apart. Pocket clip. Subjective. The Microtech looks better. The Infidel is easier to get on. This one's a little stiff, but that kind of depends on what pants you're wearing and what you prefer. They're both deep carry, as you can see right there, about as deep as you can go. Maybe the Infidel's slightly deeper because it kind of curves up a little bit, but to me, same, no difference there. But I'm going to edge it towards the Microtech because it looks better, it looks cooler than the Infidel. The Infidel has their kind of cheesy name on there, which you may or may not like. Okay, internal mechanism. This is a big one. This one goes to the Microtech, I think. When you're dealing with an OTF, for me, the biggest thing that you need is simplicity and reliability. And I think you're going to get that out of the Microtech more than the Benchmade. That's my opinion based on what I've experienced and anecdotal evidence. This is a much simpler design. Less parts in here, less moving parts in here. The Benchmade has a bunch of leaf springs and different pieces, and it's much harder to take apart, much harder to service, much harder to repair. I would say that the Microtech, the Delta, is better on that front. Along with that is spring tension. This one can go either way. So the Microtech has a harder deploy mechanism. That harder deploy mechanism, though, is because of the spring, and that spring that you use when you slide this up is the same thing that allows the blade to go in and out. So more spring tension, the harder it fires. The Infidel does not fire as hard. That means potentially, allegedly, that debris could cause it to malfunction easier than the Microtech, potentially. Now, there's other factors, it might not be that simple, but for me, when we're dealing with an OTF, I want it to fire harder rather than easier. Now, that being said, this is so much easier to fidget with. It's almost effortless, easy to open, easy to close. The Microtech, especially closing it, it takes quite a bit of thumb pressure and you get sweaty and you might slip off. It's more difficult to manipulate the Microtech than the Benchmade, in my opinion, but ultimately I give it to the Microtech. I would prefer it to fire harder. Makes me feel safer and more fuzzy and things like that. Also, Lee, when we're talking about the finish, this one can get a little more slippery or more slippery because it is a smoother finish. Looks better, but it is slicker. And the design of this, it's a little more narrow. There's less to kind of grip onto. The Benchmade, it kind of fits your hand a little bit more. It actually has some ergonomics. Like you can pinch it and deploy it, and it's easier. It doesn't slide around at all. Not that this is necessarily an issue. Like you get some pretty good purchase. It has some jimping, if you want to, I hate that word, jimping on the side, up here and on the bottom. So you have a pretty decent grip, but if you're sweaty and your hands are tired, it might be harder to deploy than the Benchmade Infidel. Next up, blade. Now, blade profile, we're going to call same. There's some minor differences in how these are ground, but they're essentially the same dagger point, double-edged blade. As you can see here, they both have a fuller running down the middle, but the Microtech does not have the tactical balls on the bottom, whereas the Benchmade has the tactical balls, the tactical nutsack right there. So that one goes for the Benchmade for having the balls to be such a cool knife. That one goes to the Benchmade in terms of how the blade is, I don't know what you call it, how it looks, I guess, or something like that. That's a joke. Completely subjective. They both look fine. The Microtech has a little more detail, so I'd kind of say this one looks a little cooler. Same function, so I'd give it to the Microtech. Now, blade steel, 100%, hands down. Microtech, this is M390. This is D2. D2 is fine, but it is far from a super steel, and it is what most people would say is outdated. Hasn't changed in forever, so that one goes to the Microtech. Let's do blade play. Microtech, very little blade play, especially up and down. Like it hardly moves. Side to side, hardly moves. You can feel it clackle just a little bit. But the Benchmade wiggles quite a bit, especially up and down. And here's really where it sets it apart, is this movement here, the up and down type movement. There's quite a bit of blade play there, whereas the Microtech, there's very little to none at all in that direction. Most of the blade play on the Microtech is side to side, and that is also very, very minimal. The Benchmade just has more. And I hear people try to say that that's not the case. And I don't know if it varies by infidel to infidel. All the ones I've owned, that's been the case. And it's really easy to see. Like I just did it. Like you can see it on camera. The Benchmade has more blade play. It just does. I don't know. I'm not saying that's an issue necessarily, but if that's something that bothers you, you might be bothered with the Benchmade. So that one definitely goes to the Microtech. Now let's talk about price. This is where it gets tricky. It does get tricky because Benchmades are all over the place. And I'm not even talking secondary market. I just mean retail. You can get these on sale. So I got this for brand new from a retailer for $275. And then I had to pay like tax or whatever, free shipping, I think. So under $300, I got this guy. It's a pretty good deal. Typically, you're only going to see that deal on the silver coated blade. The black coated blade, for some reason, I guess higher in demand, is always closer to retail. Sometimes they're up to like $450 or something ridiculous like that. It's pretty crazy. The Microtech Delta here is a little more consistent in pricing. The pricing is controlled a little tighter. These are, for a basic configuration like this, sub 400 all day. And then if you get serrations and different coating on the blades, it can sometimes pop above 400. I've seen these as low as 375 for stonewash blade, that kind of thing. So I don't know, do with that information what you will. You can get this one cheaper for sure, but only when it's on like the big sales. If you're just popping in on any given Tuesday to a store, it might be quite possible that the Delta is cheaper. And so for that reason, I'm going to say Delta, right? Because we're not talking like, yeah, this one's better, but it's like twice as much. No, not at all. In fact, a lot of places, like if you were to take 10 retailers, maybe 6 of them, this one would actually be cheaper than this, maybe more. Depending on if this is on sale or not, you may be able to get this one cheaper. I think the Dirac Delta is a little bit slept on. I think it is an amazing OTF. I don't think as many people appreciate it as they should. I'm hoping that changes. To me, I love this thing. Absolutely love it. I think it's great. And I like it more than the Combat Trudon, to be honest. I think it's a better platform. It's a better price. And I just like it way more. I think it looks better than the Trudon. So, all right, guys, that's it. Comparison between the Infidel and the Microtech. Somewhat humorous, but somewhat serious. All seriousness, get the Delta. You won't regret it. And then go buy an Infidel on super sale or in the aftermarket, because they're both cool knives to have and enjoy, and I would recommend them both. But get the Delta first, because that's a better knife. All right, guys, see ya.